As a woman, Ruth Wilson has faced discrimination too. She was Australia's first female to hold an air operator certificate, and prejudice prevailed. And I want to read a short passage from her book, with Ruth's blessing. It starts, "At the briefing for the first Australian Ballooning Championship held in Belconnen, ACT, I was subjected to sexism, discrimination, prejudice, hostility and inappropriate discourse. The flight director, a male balloonist from Sydney, looked at me and, as I entered the room, and stated loudly in front of all therein, 'What are you doing here? There is no way a woman will ever fly in any event I organise. Anyway, I don't think you are experienced enough.'" End of quote. And I'll leave it to Ruth to explain what happened then. I welcome Ruth to the stage.
Thank you, Steve. I want to acknowledge Bradley Shaw, who saw that I had a story to tell, and his team at Shoreline Publishing, who put together my beautiful memoir, Conquering Clouds. I'm standing here today because I was saved by a pod of dolphins. I was living in Calgary, Canada, flying balloons commercially, and I came back to Australia for 6 weeks to see my family and to fly at the Canberra ballooning event that happens every year, and was driving north to do a documentary with Jenny Edgley, and the brakes went on the balloon trailer. I was forced into Byron Bay and invited to go marlin fishing the next day. Travelling with me was a young American balloon pilot, Sean McKinga, who I'd just met in Canberra, who was hitching a ride to go to the Gold Coast to meet his friends there. The boat was picked up by a 7-metre wave on the Ballina Bar, thrown back on itself and split in two. I went to the bottom of the ocean drowning with my head, a very serious wound on the left side of my head. As I was panicking, trying to find air, my spirit left my body and floated above me to the right, and I heard these words clearly, "Look where your collar of your shirt is," and I could sense it was above my ears. "If you kick hard, you will find the surface and find air." Well, I kicked and I broke the surface, gasping for much needed air. Sean broke the surface near me and swam to me. We grabbed each other's hand, but fate was not finished with us. The rip dragged us another 3 kilometres out to sea. The ocean was cold and rough, and with the blood seeping from my wound onto my left shoulder, it was a very exhausting time. After an hour and a half in this cold and rough ocean, without life jackets, just when I was about to surrender to the ocean, I heard Sean's voice through the greyness of my mind. "The dolphins are with us, Ruthie. We will be saved." How we were saved and what comes after is on chapter 37. I was born in Rockhampton and I grew up in Bowen. My home life was not easy, and my only dreams of escape in North Queensland in 1960 was to win the Miss Australia Beauty Contest. It's all I thought of as a 14, 15, 16-year-old young girl. So when the local Lions Club created the first Queen of the Coral Coast beauty contest, I decided to enter. I did, I won, and that win took me to Sydney. It took me to marry, to move to set up homes in the United States, in Japan, and New Zealand. New Zealand, where I discovered my love of aviation, ballooning at the beginning, but a lot of other forms of aircraft as well. So I'm going to just read to you what I've written about my first balloon flight. And when I read it back, when the book came, I thought, did I really write that? So this is me hopping into a balloon basket in New Zealand. There were 2 pilots in New Zealand and 3 in Australia in 1975. "Hop in, Ruth," said Jim. I swung my legs over the side of the basket before he had finished his invitation. Jim pulled on the burners and threw another plume of flame upward. Moments later, Bernina gently lifted from the ground. And finally, after 30 years of yearning, I cut ties with the earth. I felt an overwhelming joy surge through my body. The ground retreated, and with it all my anxieties and despair. Below me, the shrinking landscape became organised and manageable, beauteous. I had found home. Despite the cramped conditions of the tiny basket and the lack of guardrails between me and the long fall to earth, I felt no fear. What I felt was power. The heat of the burner overhead, the dance between pilot, flame, cloth and wind. The wicker of the basket creaked when I moved, but I felt no fear. I was lost in the wonder of being airborne in what was little more than a laundry basket when Jim's words to hold onto the rope handles filtered through my dreamlike trance. He was taking the balloon backwards to earth. 20 minutes only, but the joy felt during those 20 minutes fizzed through me. I knew immediately I had found my place. It wasn't in the world, but above it. From now on, I would belong to the air. I would become a pilot, and I wouldn't just fly, I would soar. We returned to live in Australia, and I won the first Australian national championship that put me on a path to world competition and a lot of travel. But how does competition ballooning work? I'm often asked that question. So the director will check the winds and the speed and the directions and then choose a target, which you can see there, the X on the ground. And usually in a competition there may be 3 or 4 targets that a pilot has to tack the air to find the different wind speeds at different directions. And then when they get close to the target, they throw a streamer with their name and number on it, and they score. The closest one to the centre of the X scores 1,000 points. At the end of the week, they add up all the scores and we have a national or a world champion in ballooning. My life during the 80s and the 90s was focused on my mother to my 2 sons, Mark and Grant, who both got their balloon pilot certificate at the age of 18, which was the youngest they could in those days. And Mark went on to represent Australia at the age of 20 in world competition. Grant got involved in the movie industry and is still there today. I also managed my media PR company, and there was lots of ballooning and flying activity. In 1985, I was invited to come up with the concept, a ballooning celebration to celebrate our bicentenary. My idea was a fly drive expedition from Perth to Sydney over 16 days with 10 stopover locations. The event changed lives. Relationships started, relationships ended. But ballooning was the winner overall. The mobile office on the right up there was where we did all our briefings and all that. And the photo on the left is my son Mark, and actually Penny's there too, she was crewing with him. He won the Barossa Valley leg of the event. So I put this up here just to show you where this amazing event went. We started in Perth, Merredin, Kalgoorlie, the Nullarbor, Kimber, the Barossa Valley, across to Mildura, up to Broken Hill, over to Dubbo, and into Sydney. Who has been for a balloon flight? I didn't see. So raise your hands. Oh, that's wonderful. I don't usually get that kind of response. But ballooning has, it's just given me the opportunity to do so many things in my life. a world first when Ron Llewellyn, who owned a skydiving business in Niagara, north of Byron Bay, contacted me and said, I want to do a world first. I don't jump out of a hot air balloon at night. So it took about 4 or 5 months to get through the red tape with CASA, but 12th of December 1989, if I remember correctly, I took the balloon to 4,500 feet. Ron jumped, and then I flew on till I could see the first streak of light in the easter coast there near Byron Bay. And when we reunited, I remember clearly Ron yelling, it was as black as the inside of the horse when I jumped. I also did some filming work with the French documentary crew, which was wonderful. I flew from Low Isle across the water and across the top of the Daintree forest, just a few feet above, looking down into the Daintree forest, into the trees and the whole nature of that beauty we have up in Northern Australia. But as the 90s were coming to a close, all I could think of was I want to fly in the Gordon Bennett gas balloon race. In 1905, Gordon Bennett was the publisher of the New York Herald, and he set up trophies for gas ballooning, automobile, shipping as well. And in the Gordon Bennett race, the rules state you must have 2 people of the same nationality in the basket, and the team that flies the longest distance non-stop takes the trophy. On the earlier photo, Charles Rolls became really a passionate supporter of the Gordon Bennett race, and he even created this Rolls-Royce silver ghost balloon car, and he flew in the race himself. So I wanted the challenge of long-distance ballooning. I wanted to be an Australian pilot, or a pilot representing my country in this race. We don't have gas ballooning in Australia. I didn't know it at the time, but I was following in Charles Rolls' footsteps. I rented an old balloon in America, called her Jazz Bird, invited a Victorian hot air balloon pilot, Jenny Houghton, to come as my co-pilot, and we took off in Albuquerque at 10 p.m. at night to the strains of Let's Hear It for the Aussie Gals. We flew over Texas into Oklahoma, and about midday the next day, 2 o'clock in the afternoon it was, I looked out, and coming towards us was a pie-shaped black cloud from 12,000 feet to the ground. My heart jumped into my mouth. The chase crew who were following us, who were American team of guys, said, you girls should get on the ground straight away, it's black here. I said, we're already on our way down, Don. We landed near Canadian, and it's one of my treasures, that experience. I love this photo of my brother Ron helping me with my balloon. A Vietnam vet. He struggled with life until he ended his. Early 2006, I decided to use my ballooning to promote the work of Beyond Blue and the work they were doing with male suicide. I designed this balloon, named her Aurora, gathered a professional support team. We went to South Australia, and on July the 31st, 2006, I launched into a black night sky with the coast near Canberra, my destination, a distance of 750 kilometres, over a roughly 15-hour flight. A violent storm, not predicted by the meteorologist, nearly ended my life. I found out I was adopted at the age of 30. I want to share with you what I wrote about my first fixed wing flight. Or solo. I was seduced by fantasies I created around my birth father. He was a pilot, an American flyer during the war. I imagined him in his cockpit, in the air. Of course, he was tall, handsome, with laughing hazel eyes. To feel closer to him, I decided to fly planes also. I would get my fixed-wing licence. Consequently, I began flying lessons at the Illawarra Flying School in early 1998 at Sydney's Bankstown Airport, a 45-minute drive from my Sydney home. February the 16th, 1998. The weather that morning was overcast, slightly raining, when my instructor sent me on my first solo. "It's all yours, Ruth." My heart started hammering in my chest with excitement. Confidence jiggled through my body. Terror had gone on holidays. I had to remember procedures. Down the runway in the Cessna 152, lift off, climb to 500 feet, turn left, climb to 1,000 feet, turn left again. On the downward leg, do the checks, call the tower. I glanced momentarily out of the cockpit. In the distance, the outline of downtown Sydney skyline beamed back at me. In that tiny space in the cockpit, I yelled to my mystery father, "Yahoo! I'm alone, flying my plane, Dad." Turn left on base leg, descend at 700 feet, 600 feet, and at 500 feet, turn left again on the final leg. Radio the tower for clearance to land. Bring the plane down for final touchdown back to base. Final radio call to close down operations. "Well done and congratulations on your solo, Ruth," said the invisible controller. I sat in the plane's seat, momentarily glancing around at the various parked aircraft and felt nothing but jubilation. Born to fly. The words left my lips, resounding around the cockpit. I did say that I'd share with you the Gordon Bennett race in 2018. But I'm just going to go back a little bit and talk about this record attempt that I did for Beyond Blue. I launched into a night sky down in South Australia. The meteorologist had said, "You've got clear skies all the way to the east coast, about 35 kilometres an hour." And that was perfect because it was a 750 kilometre distance I needed to achieve to get this world record. I launched into this black sky and wasn't there very long, but I couldn't see a thing because the balloon envelope is so large. And I was only in the sky a short time when the rain started dropping, and I never knew that until much later because both my sons, Mark and Grant, had come down to support me. My eldest son, Mark, was the stills photographer, and my younger son was the cinematographer. And I wasn't far off the runway into the night sky when the rain started dropping on Mark's lenses, the camera lens. So he went to Don, the Met man, and said, "Is it going to rain? Is Mum going to be okay?" He said, "Oh, she's in front. She's in front of the storm. She'll be okay." So I'm blithely heading up to 3,000 feet. I put a lot of work into this record attempt, 9 months of planning. And after about 2.5 hours in the air, I heard this enormous bang. I thought I was still in the sky because it was that black night that you know that if you've ever been up there and encountered it, there's no horizon. And I thought, what could I possibly hit in the sky? I immediately turned the burners off because I had no desire to die burning. Anyway, the balloon, I stood there and the balloon stopped, the basket hit the ground. I had positioned a candlelight torch on my right for an emergency. I reached down and picked up the torch and turned it on, and through the floor of the basket of the balloon was a thick tree stump, missing my body by inches that I hadn't fallen on. I picked up my radio and I called Dennis, my crew chief, who was a retired lieutenant colonel from the army, a very capable man, he and his wife, my crew chief, and all I felt was that I had let so many people down, and I was distressed. And I said, Dennis, I'm on the ground. He said, are you safe? And I went, yes. Is there a road near you? I turned the torch around and the road was a couple of metres behind me. If I'd landed on the bitumen road from 3,000 feet, I wouldn't be talking to you today. But he said, are there any cars? And this is 3 o'clock in the morning in the bush. And I said, no. And then I saw the lights, the headlights. So I clambered out of the basket and ran out on the bitumen road. Here we are in the bush, and there's this van coming with a boat on a trailer with 3 men sitting in the front of this car. They'd been fishing for 3 days. And here's this woman in the middle of the road waving her arms up. And they pull up, and I go, oh, hello, I'm Ruth Wilson. I've just landed my balloon in the trees. And they go, they look at me, they look at the balloon, they look back, and then I'm in pouring rain, dripping wet, and one guy says, hop up in the van and we'll make you a coffee. And as I climbed 3 steps, I knew I'd broken some ribs. And then the crew, I said, can you tell Dennis where I am? And eventually all my ground crew, plus Mark and Grant came. They wanted me to go to hospital, and I said, no, I'm not going to hospital. Mark said, Mum, you're going to hospital. So they took me to Berry Hospital at 3:45 or 4 o'clock in the morning, and the doctor came in and he goes, we don't usually get balloon pilots here, we usually get motorcyclists. So it was over 500 people phoned Beyond Blue over those next couple of weeks to talk about this new phone line they were launching for men. I didn't get the record, but I sincerely hope that the publicity of that flight may have saved one man's life. So with that in mind, I still yearned for my next mammoth challenge, and I found it. I found it in 2018, the Gordon Bennett gas balloon race from Switzerland. I rented a very old German balloon, Delta Oscar Whiskey Mike Lima. While we spent nearly 18 hours in that, mostly we spent time in this wicker basket. The yellow bags each carried 9 kilos of sand to be used as ballast to gain distance or climb. The red large bag held our 2 immersion suits and life jackets in case of flight over water. The plastic bag had our food, which my darling daughter-in-law had found and organised for us. The sand hopper is the engine of a gas balloon. As the hopper becomes emptier, I then have to unhook a yellow bag and empty the sand into the hopper to have access to it to keep level flight. But our fate awaits us here. This is the Aussie team, Tanis McCarran, a pilot lives in the hinterland of Brisbane, used to fly her own Spitfire, and her husband John had his own Spitfire. And in front here, this lovely smiling girl is my 19-year-old granddaughter, Penny's daughter, Josie, who was there to support me in Switzerland. On the way to the launch site, all I could hear was, Aussie, 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 oi, oi, oi. I felt so proud to be Australian. I also felt resigned to my decision to fly the Alps and dedicated to do the best I could with this old gear that we had. The podium is where each balloon is launched from, to the strains of their national anthem. It was very rushed. We launched about 10 minutes after 8. The winds were picking up. So generally there's a lot of traditional procedure There's the local governor or mayor blessing and lots of cameras and everything, but this was a very quick race. Up onto the podium, lift off this extra sandbags to get lift to make the balloon light enough for launch, and eventually we were airborne. I called Burn Tower, had clearance, and they switched us clearance to 16,000 feet, and then they switched us to Zurich. There was a lot of work to do at the beginning, night lights over the side, making sure the radios were working, making sure that everything, all the electronics were on track. A few hours into our flight, the full moon appeared, sending silvery shadows off the mountain tips. Their spectacular images burned into my memory. Bernadette, our name of our balloon, was doing 35 kilometres, heading to the east to Italy. We were on our track. I was overcome with this sense of joy and adventure not easily found in everyday life. Tanner sat in the corner on our little we had a folding chair each, with our trusty Sky Demon map, and I'd look out. I was leaning over the side of the basket, and I'd look out and say, "What height are those peaks in front of us?" And she'd look on the map and say, 14,800 feet or whatever they were. So I'd sprinkle a little bit of sand out, try and just keep 500 to 600 feet above the tips of the mountains at least to give us some distance. No sleep now for 25 hours. We were at 15,800 feet. My teeth rattled and my body shook with the cold. I could not stop the shaking. I had 3 layers of clothes, a sleeping bag around my shoulders, a blanket over my lap, my legs, but it was so cold. The water froze in our water bottles, and the sand froze, most of our sand froze as well, which Tanis eventually broke with a little trusty hammer that I'd thought to bring home from my kitchen. We kept a check on our oxygen levels, and then approaching Italy, I called for clearance, but the Italian controllers did not want us in their airspace. When the Italian air traffic controllers refused clearance in their space and said descend to 9,000 feet, we found hell. 9,000 feet in the Alps, and in the heat of the day, the thermals were so active. The balloon and Tanis and I were being buffeted like ping pong balls around the sky. There's one point where I shall never forget. I turned in the basket to see, just there, the rugged, ragged edge of this mountain. My initial thought was to just reach out and push off it, and then clarity hit, and I yelled, 2 bags out. Tanis heaved 2 bags of sand over the side into the Alps. The balloon shot up perpendicularly to the mountain. We breathed a sigh of relief. Again, we were still buffeted around, and a little bit later, there was this cloud in front of us that I'd never seen in all the exams I'd done about and studied clouds. It was a huge circular cloud, like a donut with a circular hole in the middle. And I stood looking at it as we floated towards it, and I thought, I've never seen anything like this. I've never read anything about this. I don't know how a hydrogen balloon will react when it's in the belly of such a cloud. And it's the only time in my aviation where I suddenly felt a little fear in that I think, could this be it? I hope my boys know that I died doing what I love. And I silently prayed, and then the cloud wrapped itself around us, standing in the belly of this cloud in an open basket, and it just sort of trickled away and left us. It was a great sense of relief. And not long after that, I could see the Adriatic Sea and the coastline. We were just about to finally get off the Dolomites, the Italian Dolomites. We emerged from those clouds knowing there was only this one mountain range. The wind speed was light and variable, but finally we were there off those Dolomites. But then we were faced with the restricted NATO air base at Aviano in Italy. I called their tower to seek permission to cross their runway. And the controller said, "What are your intentions?" I said, "To land as soon as I can find a suitable place and I won't hit the roof of a house." I'd been awake for 33 hours and had little food, little water, and I was struggling. I knew at that point I was running on adrenaline to get this balloon down. But they were kind. They'd been watching these two elderly ladies from Australia in their gas balloon floating towards them across the mountains. I don't think they felt threatened. Their slogan is lethal, rapidly ready. And as I looked down the runway, I don't know these aeroplanes from the NATO air base, but they looked terrifying. They looked frightening to me. But it was just an amazing end to such a challenge, really. So once he gave clearance, the wind picked up enough just to take the balloon across the runway. And we were now down at 6,000 feet, and Tanis was standing there with 2 bags of sand, one in each arm. And in the training manuals it says, you must have 5 bags of sand to land a gas balloon safely. And I had taken Tanis to Europe in April that year, so she could have 3 training flights in a gas balloon, so she would have some knowledge of how a gas balloon worked. And I think she was thinking about those 5 bags of sand that she needed to have to land the balloon safely, because she kept saying to me, "Ruth, we've only got 2 bags of sand left." And I said, "We'll be fine, we'll be fine." And then eventually I could see the mud flats below. We had villages, little Italian villages, and vineyards everywhere. And then the mud flats in the ocean, or sea. But I really wanted to try and get to the ocean to get that extra 5 kilometres. The competitive Ruth was there. I could see that it was time, and suddenly I thought, it's time to land. We're going to land. So I pulled the red line to let some of the hydrogen out from the top of the balloon. The balloon started her descent. Halfway down, I said to Tanis, "Half a bag out." So she tipped out half a bag of sand. We kept climbing down, descending slowly, half a bag out. And then on the approach to the land, in front of me was this circular roundabout with the traffic on from the village. And I thought, we're going to end the flight in the middle of that roundabout. Please. And I had seen earlier that there was a flag flying, and I could see at ground level the wind was going in a different direction. And with a balloon, you need to be able to do that. You need to see which way the ripples are on the water, which way, any way you can see what the wind's doing when you're searching. And I believed with a lot of faith, if I held my nerve, that we would find that wind at ground level. So about 150 feet above this roundabout, with all these cars coming and going from work, not even oblivious, they had this balloon above them probably because it's totally silent. I found that change, and the balloon turned and went off at an angle of about 30 degrees, and we were skimming across the top of vineyards, just slightly keeping the basket edge off the vines. Half a bag out, I said. Another half a bag out. And I could just see that space between the vines. And just before we got to the end of it, I said to Tanis, "Anything out?" And she grabbed the red large bag that had suits in case we went over water. And she grabbed that and the food bag and dropped it between the vines. It was just enough to stop the basket from hitting the vines. So I pulled the red line and we landed. Deflated the envelope. We packed things up for about 10 minutes, tidy a little bit, got our sleeping bags out, hit the ground, slept for about 3 hours. I woke up first, then Tanis woke quickly after, and within a short time, our loved ones and the local crew who'd been helping us from Germany, they arrived on the scene, and it was so wonderful to catch up with them. Not long after that, the vineyard owner turned up, and he got so excited he was on his mobile phone ringing all the Italian media to tell them 2 lady pilots landed in my vineyard. Apparently it was all in the papers the next day, and he was very excited about that. But he did give us some of his wine, which both Tanis and I brought back to Australia with us. But we flew, as you can see there, over 409 kilometres in nearly 17 and a half hours. We landed 90 kilometres northeast of Venice, and then afterwards, as Penny will remember, we had a lovely 4 or 5 days driving back, because when you in this race, it usually starts on a Friday or a Saturday. It takes days for people to fly and retrieve, but the following Saturday is always a black tie awards banquet, and we had a lovely trip to get back for that. I've written my memoir for quite a few reasons, but one of them is that I'm trying to find the story of my biological father. He's one of the Irish Lee family from Rockhampton. So if anyone ever knows or talks to anybody with the name Lee, L-E-E, and if you do think to ask them, are you family from Rockhampton? And you can always contact me through my website, or I'm happy to give Steve permission to give anybody my contact details. He would be 100, so I don't expect him to be alive, but I'm very keen to know what kind of man he was, how he lived his life, and where do I get this need for challenge? And it's a question I'd like to ask each of you. If you have any idea or any concept of why some people need to chase the extraordinary, they need to climb the highest mountain, dive to the bottom of the ocean, fly for long flights, and sitting here amongst you all, and I've heard some stories today, a lot of you have a quite amazing range of experiences. Why is that a need when other people are comfortable with a simple, quiet, more silent life? So if you have any ideas about that and you want to share that with me, I'd love to talk to you. Also, this is one of my favourite memoirs, Ernest Garn, and he says, "Flying is hypnotic and all pilots are willing victims to the spell." And I leave that with you because I'm sure you understand those words clearly. Clouds have featured strongly throughout my life. Personal and emotional clouds I've had to rise above, often through tears. Physical clouds that I've flown above, dropped through in my magical, colourful balloons over many, many countries. And they're all clouds I've conquered to date. I'd like to ask you to step into my basket now. try to answer any questions.
Ruth, the balloon, did you carry supplementary hydrogen as well as your sand for pitching overboard?
No, not at all. The balloon, in Europe they have a category of license. It's the balloon meister. This person is trained and qualified to inflate and organise hydrogen balloons. And the rest of us all have to stand back while just this one or two people do this. So the trucks come in with the hydrogen, with their hoses. It's all done by the professional company who owns the hydrogen and this one person from each balloon. Mine was a German man called Detef Goch, and they fill the balloon up, measure it, and then it's sealed off, and that's it. That's what we have. The rule says 1,000 cubic metres of hydrogen, and that's it. So the idea of flying light so that you can take more sand is what drives the serious competitors. Now, we had very heavy old gear. We launched, by the time we could get off the ground, we only had 42 bags of sand, whereas it was not enough to get us on the podium. The top 10 pilots took between 600 and 700 kilos of sand. So sand, when you've got your sand, you can keep flying. But no, you just have what you have in the envelope.
The reason I asked was that little 90-second clip you had there.
Yes.
I noticed at one point you pulled on the little red rope. Is that to vent a little bit of hydrogen?
Yes, definitely. Yeah.
Ruth, did the balloon you flew down the Swiss Alps have hydrogen in it?
Yes.
What do they use in the balloons here where they have burners?
That's a good question. It's LPG. The difference between hot air ballooning and gas ballooning is in the hot air balloons you see around Australia, we have LPG tanks sit in the corner of the basket, and the gas is pressurised through a hose to a pilot light that sits above our head.
Okay.
And you open the tap, the LPG hits the pilot light, you open the tap, and a 6-foot or 5-foot flame comes out. Heats the air inside the envelope, hot air rises, the balloon will climb. If you don't want to climb, you don't hit the burner, and then the air will cool and the balloon will descend.
So you don't need sand if you put
No, definitely not. Nothing to do with it. The whole idea of the hydrogen and sand is really ancient, early day flying. It started in 1906, the first gas balloon, Gordon Bennett gas balloon race, and it's been on every year except during both wars. And it's on this year on the 2nd of September. They're launching from St. Gallen in Switzerland. Whichever country wins the race, they have the right to host the race 2 years hence. So there's a lot of gas balloon pilots in the Northern Hemisphere who really want to come and race here in Australia. And the few times I've been over there, it's like, oh, we want you to win so that we can come to Australia. I said, well, we don't have any hydrogen here. Not available at that kind of quantities yet.
Okay.
But it's...
And what stops the balloon with hydrogen just going up? How do you stop it to keep going up? I mean, once you get to whatever you were, 15,000 feet,
All right.
how do you stop it going up further?
The balloon will find its equilibrium, we call it. And let me explain. If you ever blow on a soap bubble,
Yes.
so the soap bubble, you blow a soap bubble, it'll go, and then it'll find its equilibrium in this air space and start flying level. Go and practice, see what it does. And that's what a hydrogen balloon will do. It'll eventually find where it's comfortable with its mass, its density, and the air around it. We settled at 14,800 feet. So I have been ballasting to get to that and had used 20 bags of sand to find that equilibrium. Once the balloon finds its equilibrium, she's happy. She will float along as long as there's no thermals or storms or anything like that. But Does that answer your question?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, remembering the Hindenburg,
Yes, we don't talk about that, I'm sorry.
why is it hydrogen and not helium?
It's expensive.
Well, helium is very expensive and it's also short. There's a short supply of helium in the world now. The balloon I flew in Albuquerque was a helium-filled gas balloon. In 1999 that was. Cost me $5,000 to fill the balloon, just for the flight. So when I took off, we had night lights over the side, we had transponder squawking 7,000, making sure the radio's working, the GPS, everything. So, I mean, in the early days, in the 1900s, the men in Europe, they stood in a basket with this hydrogen balloon above their head and their top tails and their top hat, and off they went. You know, they landed in the Arctic somewhere. I mean, they were real explorers in those days and adventurers. And each year, with everything, as you see when you look around, you know, everything's become more electronic. I know when I first started flying my hot air balloon, there was just me and the gas tanks, and that was about it. But now, when the guy's going off to fly in the World Championships next week, they've got GPSs and computers on board, and they've got Met crew on the ground who are beaming through the latest window speed and directions straight into the basket while they're flying. So it's a very different world. And did I answer your question? I got a bit carried away then.
Would you like to tell us about the red balloon they're trying to fly over the Arctic? The Italians flew their balloon over the Arctic Circle.
And how many years ago was that?
Oh, going back to about 1915.
I wasn't born then.
He was only a young bloke.
It's good to know the Italians had that spark.
It actually crashed in the Arctic.
Did they? Yeah, no, I haven't heard that story.
It was get hold of it.
Look, I have great admiration for each of you and anybody who, decides to push themselves and do something, try to explore the extraordinary. And when you think about the Italians trying to go to the Arctic in 1915,
over the North Pole.
The North Pole or wherever, brave people, I think.
What's next, Ruth?
Oh, what's next? This book. Look, I still want to do this. I'd love to do this Gordon Bennett race again, but I have to be real. The men who do this are very wealthy. They've got the very latest lightweight baskets. They cut off the end of their toothbrushes so that they can, they've got more weight for sand, and it's a different reality. But it's just, I just feel privileged that I made the effort to step into their world a little bit and experience what they do each September every year. But at this stage, it's 47 years now since I've been actively flying, and I can see as this year moves towards its close and into next year, most of my time will be taken up with travelling and doing talks, and sharing the love of aviation. And I try to aim my talk depending on my audience. If I'm talking to younger women, I try to encourage them to use aviation as a way of life, or younger men. But my life has been one of stepping stones. I've never had a plan. I would do one thing, somebody would tell somebody about it, and then I'd be asked, come and do this. So when I look back now, and when I wrote my book during COVID, it forced me to the ground. I had to cancel, like all of us, a lot of our travels and our adventures, and so I wrote this book. And now it's an entity. I feel like I have a responsibility to do something with it. I didn't know anything about the publishing industry, and the publisher I've signed the contract with, they're a small business, but they don't. So, as an author, it's falling on my shoulders now to promote and to spread the word. So I'm saying to, not all the time, but I'm saying, if you've read my book and you've enjoyed it, or you found anything you felt it needs sharing, please tell somebody. And that way the word will get out and be shared. Thank you. Thanks.
Did I not tell you that she would be awesome? Please, another round of thanks to Ruth. I didn't want to raise the question, but she does mention it in her book, that men have let me say, equipment that's different from women that make it easier in a balloon, if you get what I mean. Also, the winner of that race that Ruth took part in, I believe, landed in Poland.
Yes.
Here you are, start for the same position. Ruth flies to the southeast, he flies to the northwest. How is that goddamn possible? But it happened. Thank you all for your attention and the questions.